She left me for a millionaire. Now she's begging to come back. The open road stretched before me like an unwritten chapter, a winding path carved between towering mountains, vast deserts, and sleepy small towns that held secrets in their quiet streets. My motorhome hummed beneath me, the dashboard glowing faintly in the early morning light as I pulled onto the highway, leaving the past behind me in the rearview mirror. This wasn't just a road trip. It was a declaration, a refusal to be weighed down by betrayal, bitterness, or the ghosts of what could have been. I had spent years building a life that I thought was unshakable, only to watch it crumble overnight. But what I learned, somewhere between heartbreak and healing, was that destruction isn't the end. Sometimes it's the beginning. The first stop was a small town just outside of Phoenix, Arizona. I parked near a roadside diner, the kind with flickering neon signs and a single waitress who looked like she had stories to tell. Over a plate of eggs and black coffee, I struck up a conversation with an old rancher named Gus. Weathered, slow-spoken, and wise in that way only men who've seen too much tend to be, Gus reminded me of something I had almost forgotten. "Life don't owe you nothing, son," he said, stirring sugar into his coffee with a steady hand. "It don't matter how hard you worked, how faithful you were, or how good you had it. Sometimes it just flips you on your ass for no damn reason." I smirked. "So what do you do when that happens?" He leaned back, creaking the old booth. "You get up, you move on, and you find something better." Maybe it was the simplicity of it, or maybe it was just the kind of truth I needed to hear, but it stayed with me as I left Arizona behind and drove toward the California coastline. I hadn't been back to my childhood home in years. The town was different now, gentrified in places, run down in others. But the baseball field, it was still there, exactly as I remembered it. Parking the motorhome, I stepped onto the field, the crunch of dirt beneath my boots stirring up memories. This was where it all started. Before the degrees, the career, the marriage. Before betrayal and heartbreak and reinvention. This was where I had first learned what it felt like to swing for something bigger than myself. The metal bleachers stood empty, their paint chipping. The old scoreboard was frozen at 0, long out of commission. And yet, standing there, I could still hear the echoes of the past, the crack of a bat, the cheers from my father in the stands, the quiet promise of a future that, back then, seemed so limitless. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of cut grass and warm earth. Then I smiled. I wasn't the same man who had stepped onto this field decades ago, full of dreams and blind optimism. I was something better. I was a man who had lost everything and rebuilt. A man who had learned that happiness wasn't about what you had, but what you chose to chase after. And I had a hell of a lot left to chase. Pulling my phone from my pocket, I dialed Tori. She picked up after 2 rings, her voice bright and familiar. "Dad, where are you?" "Standing on my old baseball field, thinking about life." She laughed. "You getting philosophical on me?" "Something like that." I could hear the smile in her voice. "Well, don't overthink it. Just keep driving. We'll see you when you get here." And that was it. That was all I needed. I walked back to the motorhome, turned the key in the ignition, and pulled back onto the highway. No destination, no agenda, just the road ahead, waiting to be written. And for the first time in a long time, I couldn't wait to see where it would take me. The days after Tessa's betrayal felt like moving through a thick fog, one that dulled my senses but sharpened my pain. The house, once filled with warmth, now echoed with a hollow silence. Tessa was gone, but her absence was a presence in itself, a specter that lurked in every room. I barely slept that first night. I sat in the living room, staring at the wedding photo still perched on the fireplace mantel. Tessa's smile in the picture, once genuine, now looked like a cruel joke. Had she already been lying back then, or had she changed somewhere along the way? I wasn't sure which answer was worse. At sunrise, Tori walked in, dressed in her usual no-nonsense fashion, jeans, a fitted blazer, and her signature fierce expression. She took one look at me, disheveled and exhausted, and sighed. "All right, Dad, here's what we're going to do." She tossed her laptop onto the coffee table and opened it. Mom just thinks she can waltz out of here, take whatever she wants, and move on? Hell no. We're fighting back. I looked at her, surprised. Tori, she held up a hand. No, don't give me that. I don't want to fight crap. Mom isn't just leaving. She's stealing from you. From us. That got my attention. Stealing? Tori turned the screen toward me. It was our bank records, joint accounts, credit cards, everything. Numbers, dates, withdrawals. She's been siphoning money out for months, Dad. Thousands. Before she even left. She's been planning this. I felt my pulse hammer against my skull. Tessa hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. She had been plotting a full-scale escape, ensuring she had a financial safety net before she even dropped the bomb. You need a lawyer, Tori said. Now. She had already done the research. Within an hour, I found myself sitting in a sleek downtown office, across from a woman who looked like she chewed through men like Charles for breakfast. Amanda Sloan, divorce attorney, shark, and, according to Tori, our best shot at getting justice. Amanda flipped through the documents, nodding as she skimmed. Finally, she leaned back, tapping a red pen against the folder. She's good, Amanda said, but not that good. Freezing the accounts today will stop any more damage. As for what's already gone, we'll make her pay it back. Something in me stirred, an ember of rage that had been smothered under the weight of shock. I want everything I'm entitled to, I said, my voice steel. Amanda's lips curled into a smirk. Now we're talking. That evening, Tia came home from campus, her face expectant. When she saw my expression, her eyes darkened. It's bad, isn't it? She asked quietly. I hesitated. Your mother, she's been planning this for a while, and she's taken a lot of money. Tia was softer than her sister, more emotional, more willing to see the good in people. But at that moment, the warmth in her face vanished. So it wasn't just about Charles. She wanted out completely. I nodded. She swallowed hard, then did something I hadn't expected. She walked over and wrapped her arms around me, squeezing tight. I hate her, she whispered against my shoulder. I didn't tell her not to. The next day, Amanda got to work. The accounts were frozen, the legal papers were filed, and the battle lines were drawn. Tessa must have gotten the news quickly because she called that afternoon. Dax, what the hell is wrong with you? She snapped as soon as I picked up. I let out a dry laugh. You want a list? Or just the highlights? You froze our accounts. I need that money. Correction, I said, my voice deadly calm. That was our money, and you lost the right to it the moment you started sneaking around behind my back. She sputtered. You're being unreasonable. You're making this ugly for no reason. I didn't want to fight, Dax. I gritted my teeth. Then maybe you shouldn't have started a war. She hung up. Tori, who had been listening from the other side of the kitchen, smirked. Damn, Dad, that was cold. I love it. Over the next few weeks, the divorce moved quickly. Tessa tried to fight for more, but Amanda tore through her arguments with ruthless precision. At one point, during a tense negotiation, Tessa turned to me, her voice dripping with bitterness. I don't even recognize you anymore, she said. I met her gaze, unflinching. That's funny. I was just about to say the same thing about you. In the end, she walked away with what was fair, but nothing more. The money she had taken had to be returned, and any dreams she had of an easy transition into her new life were shattered. Good. Because I wasn't about to let her win. Not after everything she had done. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Power. The courtroom smelled like polished wood and worn-out hope. My lawyer, Amanda Sloan, a sharp and ruthless woman with a reputation for tearing apart opponents, sat beside me, flipping through pages of our case file. Across the aisle sat Tessa, looking poised, her hairstyle just right, her outfit deliberately chosen to make her seem like the wounded party. Beside her was her lawyer, some overpaid suit who probably didn't care about justice, just his billable hours. I clenched my fists under the table. I wasn't here to fight for her love, nor to plead my case as the wronged husband. I was here to protect what was left of my life. Tessa had already made her decision. Now, we were here to settle the consequences. The judge, an older woman with tired eyes, skimmed through the case file before addressing the room. Let's keep this civil. Mr. Carter, Mrs. Carter, your attorneys will present their final arguments before we proceed with the ruling. Amanda stood first, her voice calm but firm. Your Honor, my client, Dr. Dak Carter, has dedicated decades of his life to his career and family. He built a home, provided for his wife, and supported their children's futures. Yet, despite his loyalty, Mrs. Carter chose infidelity. Not only that, she attempted to drain shared assets before legal proceedings could even begin. We request an equitable division of assets, with full transparency on the funds Mrs. Carter attempted to conceal. The judge nodded, her gaze shifting to Tessa's lawyer. He stood and adjusted his tie, his voice smooth like a politician's. Your Honor, my client acknowledges her mistakes. However, we must consider her contributions as a wife and mother. Mrs. Carter devoted years to supporting her husband's demanding career and raising their children. While she regrets how the marriage ended, she is entitled to her fair share of their assets. I nearly scoffed out loud. Regrets how the marriage ended. That was a nice way of saying she packed up, took the money, and left to play house with another man. Then came the worst part, the cross-examinations. Tessa took the stand first, her voice laced with just the right amount of sadness, her eyes glistening as if she had rehearsed every word in the mirror. I never meant to hurt Dax, she said, her voice quivering. I loved him, but over time we grew apart. I felt invisible, like I wasn't needed anymore. And then I met Charles. He made me feel seen. Amanda rose to her feet, her expression unreadable. Mrs. Carter, did Dr. Carter ever abuse you, neglect you, betray you in any way before your affair? Tessa hesitated. No, but did he provide for you financially? Yes. Did he support you emotionally? Tessa glanced toward her lawyer, looking for a lifeline. Sometimes, but he was always working. Amanda cut her off. So, to be clear, your husband was a loyal provider, a committed father, and a faithful spouse, yet you still chose to cheat and steal from him? Silence. The judge adjusted her glasses. Mrs. Carter, answer the question. Tessa swallowed hard. Yes. And just like that, the carefully curated narrative she had tried to spin fell apart. The judge's ruling was swift and decisive. The assets were split, but not in the way Tessa had hoped. She was forced to return the money she had taken, and her alimony request was denied. As we walked out of the courthouse, Tessa caught up to me in the hallway, her voice softer now. Dax, can we at least be friends? I turned to her, studying the face I had once loved. There was a time when I would have done anything to fix things, to understand why she had chosen someone else. But that time had passed. Friends, I repeated, letting the word linger in the air. Then I shook my head. No, Tessa, we were never friends. We were husband and wife. And now, we're nothing. She flinched, as if finally understanding the weight of what she had lost. I walked away, feeling lighter than I had in months. Coming home that night was strange. The house felt too big, too quiet. Tessa's things were gone, but ghosts of her remained. The faint scent of her perfume on a pillow, a forgotten coffee mug in the cabinet. Torai and Tia came over later, bringing takeout in their sharp, unapologetic humor. So, she wanted to be friends, huh? Torai smirked as she handed me a beer. Yeah, I said, shaking my head. Tia snorted. The audacity. I chuckled, feeling something I hadn't in a long time. Peace. As we sat around the kitchen table, laughing and eating, I realized something. Tessa may have walked away, but the people who truly mattered had stayed. And that was enough. Life has a way of balancing the scales. Sometimes justice arrives in the form of a gavel striking down in a courtroom. Other times, it sneaks in through the back door, patient and quiet, letting karma do its work. It had been nearly a year since the divorce was finalized. By then, I had stopped checking up on Tessa. She was a closed chapter, a name I no longer spoke, a ghost in my past. My focus was on my daughters, my work, and the steady process of reclaiming the life that she had shattered. But karma was busy, and when it finally arrived at her doorstep, it didn't just knock, it kicked the damn thing down. It started as a whisper, a casual comment at the university from a colleague who had overheard something at a country club. Did you hear about Charles? Word is his whole empire's crumbling. I didn't care. At least, that's what I told myself. But as the days passed, the whispers turned into full-blown conversations, then headlines. Real estate mogul Charles Monroe files for bankruptcy after market collapse. Tessa Monroe, formerly Tessa Carter, forced to sell mansion amid financial crisis. That last one made me pause. It was surreal, seeing her name in the news, attached to words like loss and desperation. She had walked away from our marriage chasing a dream, only to watch it turn to ash in her hands. I wasn't a saint. I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a sliver of satisfaction in seeing karma do its work. But what I didn't expect was the call. It came late one evening. I was at home, reviewing notes for an upcoming presentation, when my phone buzzed. The screen flashed a name I hadn't seen in months. Tessa. I stared at it. Let it ring. Let it ring again. Then at the last second, I answered. Dax. Her voice was small, fragile in a way I had never heard before. I need to talk to you. I leaned back in my chair, a smirk playing at the edges of my lips. Here it comes. I don't think we have anything left to say. She hesitated. Please. I sighed. Curiosity won. Fine. Tomorrow. Meet me at the Rusty Spoon. Noon. The next day, I arrived a few minutes early, ordering a black coffee and settling into a booth near the back of the small cafe. I hadn't seen Tessa since the divorce hearing, but when she walked through the door, I barely recognized her. The woman who had once dripped with confidence, always put together, always effortlessly elegant, was gone. She looked tired, not just physically, though the dark circles beneath her eyes told their own story. It was something deeper, something hollow in the way she moved, like she had been carrying a weight far too heavy for far too long. She slid into the booth across from me, folding her hands together. You look good, she said softly. Can't say the same for you. Her lips pressed together. I didn't know her kindness. I made a mistake, Dax. I leaned back, crossing my arms. Oh, which part? The cheating? The lying? Or the part where you walked out on your family? She flinched. Good. I thought I was making the right choice, she whispered. Charles. He wasn't who I thought he was. I let out a short, humorless laugh. No kidding. Guess the money ran out. She looked down, twisting the napkin in her hands. He lost everything, she admitted. Bad investments. The market turned on him. One day we were looking at yachts in Miami. The next, we were selling furniture to pay off debts. I shook my head. And now you're here. Looking for what exactly? She met my eyes, and for a second, I saw the woman I had married. The one who, once upon a time, I had trusted with my entire heart. But I wasn't that man anymore, and she wasn't that woman. I want to come home. I blinked. Then I laughed. A real, full-bodied laugh that made a couple of patrons glance over. Home? You destroyed that. Home doesn't exist for you anymore. She reached across the table, desperation creeping into her voice. Dax, I was stupid. I see that now. I pull back. Don't sit here and pretend you just made a mistake. You didn't trip and fall into another man's arms. Tessa, you chose this. You chose him. And now that it's falling apart, you think you can waltz back into my life? Her eyes welled up with tears, but I felt nothing. I miss the girls, she whispered. I miss you. I studied her for a long moment before responding. The girls? The ones you abandoned? The ones who begged you not to leave? Yeah, they're doing just fine. Without you. She shook her head. I just want to be part of their lives again. Then you better start praying they'll forgive you. Because I sure as hell don't. I stood, tossing a few bills onto the table. Good luck, Tessa. You're going to need it. And with that, I walked out. I didn't look back. The first morning, I woke up alone after the divorce. I stared at the ceiling for an hour, listening to the silence. No Tessa moving around the kitchen. No coffee brewing. Just quiet. It was a strange, hollow feeling like stepping off a moving treadmill and feeling the ground stand still beneath you. For the first time in over 2 decades, I was no longer a husband, just a man. I won the legal battle, but that didn't mean I felt like a winner. The scars were still fresh, and even though Tessa was out of my life, her betrayal still lingered in the corners of my mind. I buried myself in work, extra projects, late nights in the lab, research papers that no one but my colleagues would read. My office became a refuge, a place where numbers and formulas made sense, unlike the chaos that had been my marriage. But as the months passed, something inside me shifted. I was tired of feeling like a ghost in my own life. One evening, Tori showed up at my house unannounced. She took one look at the half-empty whiskey glass on the coffee table and the unopened mail stacked on the counter and sighed. "Dad, this isn't you." I didn't argue because I knew she was right. Then she said something that stuck with me. "You're free now. Do something with it." That night, I sat down with a notepad and started making a list. It was a simple list at first. Places I had always wanted to go, things I had always wanted to do, but never could because of work, marriage, responsibilities. I had spent my entire adult life playing it safe, always thinking about the next step, the next goal. But for what? For someone who had walked away the second she found something more exciting? Not anymore. The first thing on the list was something that had always been in the back of my mind, a solo trip. Not a quick business trip or a weekend getaway, but something real. 2 weeks later, I was on a plane to the Caribbean. The consulting gig had come up at the perfect time. An engineering firm in St. Lucia needed an expert to help optimize their manufacturing systems. Normally, I would have sent a colleague, but this time, I said yes. The moment I stepped off the plane, the warm island air wrapped around me like a long-lost friend. The colors were brighter here. The ocean a shade of blue I didn't know existed, the trees a deep, vibrant green. And the people? They moved slower, laughed easier. No one was in a rush. I checked into a beachfront villa the company had arranged, but within days, I found myself spending more time at a small, family-run and down the road. The owner, a woman named Camille, ran the place with an easy charm. She had a smile that could disarm a soldier and an attitude that reminded me of a younger version of myself, fearless, unbothered by rules. One night, after a long day of work, I wandered into the inn's bar. Camille was behind the counter, slicing limes. "You look like a man who needs a drink." I chuckled. "That obvious?" She poured me a glass of aged rum, sliding it across the bar. "You're American. You are too much. You think too much. You need to stop." I raised an eyebrow. "And do what instead?" She grinned. "Live." It was such a simple word, but it hit me like a hammer. I started spending my evenings at the inn, listening to locals play music, drinking rum, and learning about the island. One night, Camille convinced me to go night swimming. "The water's warm," she promised. "You'll never feel more alive." Standing in the ocean under a full moon, feeling the waves lap against my skin, I realized something. I'd spent my whole life chasing security, stability, but real happiness? It was in moments like this, unplanned, unpredictable, and completely out of my control. I started saying yes more. Yes to a fishing trip with a group of retired sailors who had more stories than fish. Yes to hiking up a volcanic mountain at sunrise, where the view was so breathtaking it made my chest ache. Yes to a woman whose name I won't mention, but whose touch reminded me that I was still a man, still capable of passion. By the time my consulting contract ended, I had changed. Not in a dramatic, movie-worthy way. There was no grand epiphany, no perfect resolution. But I had let go of something heavy. I no longer felt like a man defined by what I had lost. I was just me. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. When I returned to Texas, my daughters immediately noticed the difference. "You look younger, Tia said, studying me over dinner. Tori smirked. Or maybe he just got a tan and finally started using moisturizer. I laughed, shaking my head. They had no idea how right they were. I didn't move back into my old life. That house, the one Tessa and I had built together, no longer felt like home. So I sold it, bought a smaller place, one that was just mine. I kept traveling, sometimes for work, sometimes just for the hell of it. And women? I wasn't in a rush. I had flings, sure, but I was in no hurry to settle down again. I liked the freedom, the unpredictability. Tessa, meanwhile, was drowning. After Charles went broke, she tried reaching out, first to the girls, then to me. She wanted to meet for coffee to talk. I ignored her. The past was a place I had no interest in revisiting. One evening, as I sat on my back porch with a glass of bourbon, watching the Texas sunset, I thought about how much had changed. How much I had changed. I wasn't the same man who had been blindsided by his wife's betrayal. I was someone new. And for the first time in years, I was excited to see where the road would take me next. It was a crisp May evening, the kind where the air carried the scent of fresh-cut grass and distant barbecue smoke. The university courtyard buzzed with the energy of families celebrating their graduates, but my focus was on one person, my youngest daughter, Tia. She stood on the stage, clad in her cap and gown, her dark curls peeking out beneath the mortarboard. When her name was called, a thunderous applause erupted from our section of the crowd. Tori, standing beside me, whistled loudly. I grinned, clapping hard enough that my palms stung. Tia had done it. Top of her class, a degree in civil engineering, and a bright future ahead. I should have been thinking about that, about how proud I was. But there was a shadow lingering at the edge of my thoughts, a ghost that refused to stay buried. Tessa. I hadn't seen her in nearly 2 years, and I preferred it that way. But I knew she was here. I could feel it. The ceremony ended, and the courtyard swarmed with families reuniting. I spotted Tia moving toward us, her gown flowing as she rushed forward. She threw her arms around me, squeezing tight. "We did it, Dad," she whispered. I hugged her back, my voice thick with emotion. "No, baby girl. You did it." Tori joined in, and for a moment, it was just us, the three of us, like it had been for the past 2 years. We had weathered the storm, built something new from the ruins. But then, as if summoned by fate, the moment shattered. A familiar voice cut through the noise. "Tia." We turned. There she was. Tessa stood a few feet away, hesitant, her hands clutching a small gift bag. She looked older, not just in the way that time naturally wore a person down, but in the way regret and disappointment carved themselves into your features. Her once meticulously styled hair was now a shade too dark, as if she were trying to reclaim her youth. Her dress, though elegant, hung awkwardly on her frame, as if she had lost too much weight too quickly. She was nervous. That much was obvious. She didn't belong here, and she knew it. Tia stiffened beside me. Tori crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. I wanted to say congratulations," Tessa said, her voice softer than I remembered. She took a hesitant step forward, extending the small bag. "I got you something." Tia didn't reach for it. She just stared, her face a storm of emotions. "You don't have to do this, Mom." Tessa's face fell. "I want to. Please." Silence. Tori, never one to hold back, finally spoke. "Why are you really here?" Tessa flinched, as if she'd been slapped. I wanted to see my daughter graduate." Tori's laugh was sharp. "Now you care?" I could see Tessa struggling, grasping for some justification, some excuse that would make this moment easier. But there was nothing. No words could undo the years of abandonment. No apology could erase the fact that she had chosen someone else over us. Tia finally spoke, her voice steady. "Mom, I don't hate you, but you made your choices. You left. You weren't there for Dad when he needed you. You weren't there for me and Tori. We got through it without you." Tessa's eyes filled with tears. "I regret it, Tia. I regret everything." Tia shook her head. "That's not enough." Tessa's gaze flickered to me, searching for some kind of opening, some shred of hope that maybe, just maybe, I'd let her back in. But all I had for her was a quiet, impassive stare. Tessa looked down, nodding slowly, as if she finally understood. I just, I wanted to say I'm sorry. For the first time, I believed her, but it didn't change anything. Tia finally took the bag, but didn't open it. Goodbye, Mom. Tessa hesitated, then turned and walked away. As she disappeared into the crowd, Tori let out a deep breath, then turned to me. That was weirdly satisfying. I chuckled, wrapping an arm around each of my daughters. Come on, let's go celebrate. And just like that, the past was left where it belonged, behind us. The open road stretched before me like an unwritten chapter, a winding path carved between towering mountains, vast deserts, and sleepy small towns that held secrets in their quiet streets. My motorhome hummed beneath me, the dashboard glowing faintly in the early morning light as I pulled onto the highway, leaving the past behind me in the rearview mirror. This wasn't just a road trip. It was a declaration, a refusal to be weighed down by betrayal, bitterness, or the ghosts of what could have been. I had spent years building a life that I thought was unshakable, only to watch it crumble overnight. But what I learned, somewhere between heartbreak and healing, was that destruction isn't the end. Sometimes it's the beginning. The first stop was a small town just outside of Phoenix, Arizona. I parked near a roadside diner, the kind with flickering neon signs and a single waitress who looked like she had stories to tell. Over a plate of eggs and black coffee, I struck up a conversation with an old rancher named Gus. Weathered, slow-spoken, and wise in that way only men who've seen too much tend to be, Gus reminded me of something I had almost forgotten. Life don't owe you nothing, son, he said, stirring sugar into his coffee with a steady hand. It don't matter how hard you worked, how faithful you were, or how good you had it. Sometimes it just flips you on your ass for no damn reason. I smirked. So what do you do when that happens? He leaned back, creaking the old booth. You get up, you move on, and you find something better. Maybe it was the simplicity of it, or maybe it was just the kind of truth I needed to hear, but it stayed with me as I left Arizona behind and drove toward the California coastline. I hadn't been back to my childhood home in years. The town was different now, gentrified in places, run down in others. But the baseball field? It was still there, exactly as I remembered it. Parking the motorhome, I stepped onto the field, the crunch of dirt beneath my boots stirring up memories. This was where it all started. Before the degrees, the career, the marriage. Before betrayal and heartbreak and reinvention. This was where I had first learned what it felt like to swing for something bigger than myself. The metal bleachers stood empty, their paint chipping. The old scoreboard was frozen at 0, long out of commission. And yet, standing there, I could still hear the echoes of the past, the crack of a bat, the cheers from my father in the stands, the quiet promise of a future that, back then, seemed so limitless. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of cut grass and warm earth. Then I smiled. I wasn't the same man who had stepped onto this field decades ago, full of dreams and blind optimism. I was something better. I was a man who had lost everything and rebuilt. A man who had learned that happiness wasn't about what you had, but what you chose to chase after. And I had a hell of a lot left to chase. Pulling my phone from my pocket, I dialed Tori. She picked up after 2 rings, her voice bright and familiar. Dad, where are you? Standing on my old baseball field, thinking about life. She laughed. You getting philosophical on me? Something like that. I could hear the smile in her voice. Well, don't overthink it. Just keep driving. We'll see you when you get here. And that was it. That was all I needed. I walked back to the motorhome, turned the key in the ignition, and pulled back onto the highway. No destination, no agenda, just the road ahead, waiting to be written. And for the first time in a long time, I couldn't wait to see where it would take me.